I was still trembling from surgery when I called my son and whispered, "Ethan, I can't even stand up by myself." There was silence on the line before he sighed heavily. "Mom, I can't keep putting my life on hold for you." Then I heard Monica's voice in the background. "Tell her to hire somebody." The call ended. I lay there in that cold hospital bed staring at the ceiling, realizing my own son had become a stranger to me. A few moments later, a nurse quietly walked in, adjusted my blanket, and held my shaking hand like I mattered. I didn't know it then, but the woman standing beside my hospital bed would soon inherit everything my son thought was already his. If this story touches your heart, please like and subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments, have you ever felt abandoned by someone you loved? Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I truly read every comment. People think loneliness begins when someone dies. They're wrong. Real loneliness begins when the people still alive stop loving you. My husband, Caleb Dixon, had been gone for almost 11 years when I finally understood that truth. Before he died, our house in Columbus, Ohio was always loud. Caleb loved old jazz records and Sunday barbecues. He'd dance with me in the kitchen while burgers burned outside on the grill because he got distracted kissing me. Back then, Ethan used to laugh at us. "Dad, you're embarrassing Mom again." Caleb would grin and pull me closer anyway. She married me. Too late to escape now. Those memories were all I had left now. Photographs, voicemails, an empty house, and a son who no longer had time for me. The morning of my surgery, I remember sitting alone in the hospital room staring at the television without really watching it. Nurses moved in and out while machines beeped around me. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I was terrified. At 72 years old, even a routine hip surgery feels dangerous. You start thinking about things younger people ignore. What if I don't wake up? What if something goes wrong? Who will make decisions for me? I kept checking my phone, waiting for Ethan to walk through the door. He had promised me he would. "Mom, don't worry," he'd said 3 nights earlier. "I'll be there before they take you in." I believed him because mothers never stop believing their children. Even when they should. Hours passed. No Ethan. No text. No call. I finally sent him a message myself. "Are you still coming?" 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. "Running late. Big client meeting. I'll come after." I stared at the screen for a long time. Caleb would have canceled the entire world for me. But Ethan wasn't Caleb. The nurse preparing my IV smiled gently. "Your family coming soon?" I forced a smile. "My son's busy with work." She nodded politely, but I saw the look in her eyes. Nurses see everything. They know who gets visitors and who doesn't. Right before they rolled me into surgery, I looked toward the hallway one last time. Still no Ethan. The anesthesia hit fast after that. The next thing I remember was pain. Sharp. Burning. My body felt like concrete. I tried moving my leg and immediately regretted it. A groan escaped my throat before I could stop it. "Easy there," a soft voice said. I opened my eyes slowly and saw a woman adjusting my blanket. She looked maybe late 30s with tired eyes, but a calm smile. "You're in recovery," she said gently. "Surgery went well." I swallowed hard. "My son." She glanced around the empty room before looking back at me. "I haven't seen anyone yet." Something cracked quietly inside my chest. I turned my face toward the wall because I didn't want a stranger watching me cry. Hours later, after they moved me into a regular room, I finally called Ethan myself. He answered on the 4th ring. "Hey, Mom." His voice sounded distracted. Loud television in the background, Monica talking somewhere nearby. "I'm out of surgery," I whispered. "That's good." I waited. That was it. That was all he had. I can't walk alone yet, I said carefully. The doctor says I'll need help at home for a little while. Silence. Then a sigh. Mom, this week is impossible for me. My throat tightened. What do you mean impossible? I've got clients flying in from Chicago. Noah has baseball practice every night. Monica's already overwhelmed. As if I had asked him to move mountains. As if helping his mother after surgery was unreasonable. I took care of you after your appendix surgery, I said softly. You were 17. Another silence. Then Monica's voice in the background. Tell her to hire somebody. I heard every word, every single word. Ethan lowered his voice. Mom, you know we love you, but we can't put our entire lives on hold. Love? Funny how people use that word while abandoning you. Before I could answer, the line disconnected. I just stared at my phone. I don't know how long I sat there before tears started sliding down my face. Quiet tears. The kind older women learn to cry after decades of disappointment. Not loud enough for anyone to rescue us. A few minutes later, the same nurse walked into my room carrying medication. She paused when she saw my face. Oh, she said softly. Honey, that word nearly broke me. She set the medicine down and adjusted my pillow carefully. What's your name? I asked. Grace, she said. Grace Bennett. I nodded slowly. My son was supposed to come. Grace didn't respond immediately. She just pulled the chair closer to my bed. That hurts more than surgery sometimes, she said quietly. I looked at her then. Really looked at her. Most people rush around older women like we're invisible. But Grace looked directly at me like my pain mattered. Like I mattered. Over the next 2 days, she became the only familiar thing in that hospital room. She helped me sit up when I cried from the pain. She braided my hair after it became tangled. She snuck me extra pudding cups because the hospital food tasted awful. And every time the door opened, part of me still hoped Ethan would walk through it. But he never did. On the second night, Grace found me awake around 2 a.m. You should try to sleep, she whispered. I used to think getting old meant your body failed you, I murmured. Grace leaned against the doorway quietly. But now I think the hardest part is realizing who truly loves you. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she walked over and gently squeezed my hand. You'd be surprised, she said softly. Sometimes the people who care the most aren't the ones we expect. I didn't know why those words stayed with me. Maybe because deep down I already knew my life was changing. And not because of the surgery. Because for the first time in my life, I was beginning to understand that my son no longer saw me as his mother, only as a burden. The strange thing about heartbreak at my age is that you stop reacting loudly. When you're young, betrayal makes you scream. When you're older, it makes you quiet. The morning after Ethan ignored my calls again, I sat alone in my hospital room, staring out the window, while weak sunlight spilled across the parking lot below. My hip throbbed every time I moved. Even breathing felt exhausting. But the pain in my chest hurt worse. I kept replaying Ethan's words in my mind. We can't put our entire lives on hold. I wondered if he remembered all the years I had put my life on hold for him. The nights I worked double shifts at the bookstore after Caleb's business nearly collapsed in the 90s. The mornings I skipped meals so Ethan could go on school field trips without feeling poor. The Christmas when I sold my grandmother's diamond bracelet because Ethan wanted a used car before college. Mothers never keep score. Maybe that's why children learn to take us for granted. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Grace walked into the room carrying a small tray. Good morning, she said with a smile. I managed to steal you a decent cup of coffee before the cafeteria ruined breakfast again. I laughed quietly for the first time in days. That bad horrific, she whispered dramatically. Possibly illegal. She set the coffee beside me and began checking my chart. You actually slept a little last night. You noticed? I notice everything. There was something comforting about the way she said it. Not intrusive, just caring. Most nurses were efficient and kind, but Grace was different. She moved slowly when she spoke to patients, like she understood loneliness couldn't be rushed. As she adjusted the blanket near my legs, she glanced toward the empty chair beside the window. No visitors yet, I shook my head. Ethan's busy. The words tasted bitter now. Grace didn't push further. Instead, she sat down for a moment and handed me the coffee carefully. My mom used to drink 3 cups every morning, she said softly. Said it was the only reason she tolerated humanity? I smiled faintly. She sounds wise. She was. Something in her expression shifted after that. A sadness, brief but deep. I took a small sip. The coffee was terrible. But somehow it still made me emotional. Because someone had thought about me. That shouldn't feel extraordinary. But it did. Later that afternoon, Grace helped me walk down the hallway for physical therapy. Every step sent pain shooting through my hip. You're doing great, she encouraged gently. I feel 98. She grinned. Well, you complain less than the 40-year-old men here, so that's impressive. I laughed again, breathless this time. Halfway down the corridor, I noticed a younger woman surrounded by balloons and flowers, while her family crowded around her bed. A little girl climbed into the woman's lap carefully. The woman kissed her forehead. Something tightened painfully inside me. Grace noticed me staring. You okay? I nodded too quickly. I used to hate hospitals, I admitted quietly. Now I think I hate seeing what I don't have anymore. Grace slowed beside me. What do you mean? I swallowed hard. My husband died 11 years ago, and somewhere along the way, I lost my son too. For a moment, the hallway noise faded. Grace didn't respond with empty comfort the way most people do. She didn't say, I'm sure he loves you. She didn't defend him. Instead, she asked softly, Has he always been like this? The question caught me off guard, because the truth was, no. Ethan used to be sweet. As a little boy, he'd crawl into my lap during thunderstorms and say, Mom, nothing bad can happen if I'm with you. After Caleb died from a heart attack, Ethan stayed at my house almost every evening for months. He brought groceries, fixed light bulbs, watched old football games with me because he knew silence made my grief worse. But then life changed, or maybe money changed him. Ethan got deeper into real estate. Monica started caring about appearances, bigger houses, country club memberships, expensive vacations posted online like advertisements. And slowly I became inconvenient, too emotional, too old, too needy. Grace listened quietly while I spoke. When I finished, she leaned against the wall beside me. My mother spent her last year in a nursing facility, she said suddenly. I looked at her. She hated it there. Her voice remained calm, but I could hear something breaking underneath it. I visited every day after work. But my brothers? She shook her head slowly. They kept saying they were too busy. I didn't know what to say. Grace stared down the hallway before continuing. The night she died, she asked me something I still can't forget. Her eyes glistened slightly now. She asked why the people she loved stopped showing up. My throat tightened immediately. Oh, Grace. She wasn't difficult, she whispered. She wasn't cruel. She just got older. And somehow that made everyone treat her like a burden. I felt tears sting my eyes, because every word felt painfully familiar. Grace inhaled slowly and forced a smile. That's why I became a nurse, to help people, to make sure nobody feels abandoned at the end of their life. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she looked directly at me, and for the record, she added softly, "You are not a burden." I nearly cried right there in the hallway, not because the words were dramatic, but because I realized how long it had been since anyone said something kind to me without wanting something in return. That evening, Ethan finally texted me, "Sorry, crazy week, maybe I can stop by Sunday." Sunday was 4 days away. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. No apology for missing surgery, no concern, no love, just obligation. Grace walked in later to check my medication and immediately noticed my expression. Bad news. "My son might visit me," I said quietly. She frowned slightly. I gave a tired laugh. I suppose I should be grateful. Grace looked like she wanted to say something, but stopped herself. Instead, she helped me settle into bed. As she turned off the light near the door, she paused. "You know something, Giselle? What the people who truly love you don't make you beg for their attention." After she left, I lay awake in the darkness, thinking about those words. Outside my hospital window, snow had started falling softly across Columbus. Everything looked cold, silent, lonely, and for the first time in my life, I began wondering if motherhood could survive without respect, or if love eventually dies when only one person keeps fighting for it. The hospital discharged me on a gray Thursday morning. Outside, the Ohio sky looked heavy with snow, and the cold air sliced through my coat the moment the automatic doors opened. I stood there clutching my walker while people rushed past me toward waiting cars and waiting families. I kept scanning the parking lot anyway. No Ethan, no Monica, no familiar face at all. Just strangers moving quickly through their own lives. A younger nurse handed me discharge papers and smiled politely. "Do you have someone driving you home, Mrs. Dixon?" Before I could answer, Grace stepped beside me. "I'm calling her a taxi," she said gently. The nurse nodded and walked away. I looked down, embarrassed. "I'm sorry I whispered. I didn't think I'd still be bothering you after your shift." Grace frowned immediately. "You're not bothering me." I gave a weak smile. "That's easy to say now." "No," she said firmly. "I mean it." There was something almost protective in her voice. She adjusted the scarf around my neck like a daughter would have done for her mother. That simple gesture nearly broke me again. The taxi arrived 10 minutes later. Grace helped me carefully into the back seat before handing the driver my address. Then she surprised me. "I wrote my number down," she said softly, slipping a folded paper into my hand. "If you need anything at all, call me." I stared at her. "You've already done too much." Her expression turned sad for a second. "Sometimes people only survive hard seasons because someone stayed a little longer than they had to." I didn't know how to answer that. So instead, I squeezed her hand. Then the taxi pulled away. The drive home felt longer than usual. Columbus looked cold and distant through the window. Restaurants were full. People carried shopping bags through the sidewalks. Life moved normally for everyone else, while mine felt like it had quietly fallen apart. When we finally pulled into my driveway, I felt an ache deep in my chest. My house looked enormous now. Too quiet. Too empty. Caleb and I bought that house 37 years earlier, right after his construction company finally became profitable. I still remembered him carrying Ethan through the front door as a little boy while shouting, "This house belongs to the Dixons." Now, back then, it had felt full of possibility. Now it felt like a museum. The taxi driver helped bring my small hospital bag inside before leaving. And then, it was just me. Silence wrapped around the house immediately. I stood in the foyer gripping my walker, while old family photographs stared back at me from the walls. Christmas mornings, beach vacations, birthday cakes. 1,000 frozen moments from a family that no longer existed. I moved slowly toward the kitchen, pain shooting through my hip with every step. Even small things suddenly felt impossible. Reaching for a glass, opening cabinets, standing long enough to heat soup. At one point, I nearly dropped a pot because my hands were trembling so badly. I finally sat down at the kitchen table, breathing hard. The loneliness inside that house felt unbearable. I looked at my phone. Still nothing from Ethan. No text asking if I got home safely. No call. Nothing. Around 6 that evening, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. For one stupid, hopeful second, I thought maybe Ethan had finally come. But when I opened the door, Grace stood there holding a grocery bag. I blinked in surprise. "What are you doing here?" "You sounded exhausted earlier," she said casually. So I stopped at the store. I stared at the bag. Soup, crackers, fruit, tea, small things. But suddenly I felt emotional again because nobody had taken care of me like that in years. "You didn't have to do this." "I know." Grace stepped inside carefully. Her eyes moved around the house quietly. "It's beautiful. It used to feel warmer." She looked at the photographs lining the hallway. "You have a lovely family." I almost laughed at the irony of that statement. Instead, I said softly, "We used to be close." Grace didn't ask questions. She simply helped me sit down before moving through the kitchen naturally, as if caring for people had become second nature to her. Within 20 minutes, she had heated soup, organized my medication beside the sink, and even changed the dead batteries in my television remote after noticing it wasn't working. I watched her in silence. Not because I expected perfection from her, but because kindness like hers had become unfamiliar to me. "You should charge people extra for this," I joked weakly. Grace smiled. "I think the soup is payment enough. For the first time since surgery, I actually ate a full meal." After dinner, Grace helped me walk upstairs slowly so I could shower safely. Halfway down the hallway, I noticed something strange. The office door was slightly open. I frowned. I always kept it closed. "Did someone come by while you were in the hospital?" Grace asked. "I don't think so." A strange feeling crawled up my spine. I moved toward the office carefully and pushed the door open wider. At first, nothing looked unusual. Then I noticed the desk drawer. Slightly open. I froze. I always locked that drawer. Inside were financial papers, investment records, and property documents Caleb handled before he died. My heartbeat quickened immediately. I opened the drawer slowly. The folders inside had clearly been moved around. Some papers were crooked. Others were missing from their original order. And sitting near the front was a bank envelope I didn't recognize. My hands started shaking. Grace stepped closer. "What is it?" "I didn't leave this like this." I pulled the envelope out carefully. Inside was paperwork from my bank. At first, the words blurred together because of my panic. Then, one sentence caught my eye. "Authorized account access request." My stomach dropped. Ethan's name appeared on the second page. I sat down heavily in the chair. "No!" Grace looked alarmed. "Giselle!" I kept flipping through the documents. There were forms requesting shared account oversight, preliminary financial authorization inquiries, and handwritten notes in Ethan's writing. Mom forgets things sometimes. We may need future assistance managing her finances. I couldn't breathe for a moment. The room suddenly felt too small, too cold. Grace knelt beside me carefully. "What's wrong?" I looked at her with tears filling my eyes. My son. My voice cracked. He's trying to take control of my accounts. Grace's face darkened immediately. Did you approve any of this? No. The word came out barely above a whisper. I looked back down at the papers in disbelief. Ethan had started preparing this before my surgery, before I even needed help walking, before I ever became vulnerable. A horrifying realization slowly settled into my chest. This wasn't fear for me. This was planning. Careful planning. And suddenly, for the first time in my entire life, I began wondering if my son had been waiting for me to become weak. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan's handwriting on those papers. Mom forgets things sometimes. The sentence replayed in my mind over and over until it felt poisonous. I sat awake in my bed, listening to the old grandfather clock downstairs, ticking through the silence of the house Caleb built for us. Around 3 a.m, I finally turned on the lamp beside me and stared at the framed photograph on my nightstand. It was taken the summer Ethan turned 12. Caleb had one arm around me while Ethan stood between us, grinning with missing front teeth and sunburned cheeks after a family trip to Lake Erie. We looked happy. Real happy. I touched the glass frame gently. What happened to us? I whispered. But photographs never answer. By morning, my hip pain had worsened from exhaustion. Even getting out of bed felt brutal. I moved slowly downstairs, gripping the railing, while fear twisted inside my stomach. Not fear of surgery anymore, fear of my own son. That realization made me physically ill. I managed to make coffee before sitting carefully at the kitchen table again. The paperwork remained exactly where I left it. I forced myself to read every page this time. The deeper I looked, the colder I felt. There were emails printed between Ethan and someone at the bank. Some of them were polite. Others sounded impatient. My mother is becoming increasingly forgetful. I'm concerned she may soon be unable to manage her finances independently. Please advise regarding next steps for family oversight access. My hands shook harder. Forgetful. Because I misplaced my reading glasses twice. Because I once repeated a story at Thanksgiving. I wasn't confused. I wasn't incapable. I was old. And apparently to Ethan, that was close enough. A sharp knock startled me. I jumped slightly before realizing it was Grace. When I opened the door, she immediately studied my face. You didn't sleep? No. She stepped inside, carrying another grocery bag, and stopped when she noticed the papers spread across the kitchen table. You've been reading everything? I nodded slowly. Grace sat beside me without speaking at first. She carefully looked through several pages before exhaling heavily. This is serious, Giselle. I know. Did Ethan ever talk to you about this? No. The word came out bitter. That's what hurts most, I whispered. He smiled in my face while doing this behind my back. Grace remained quiet. Then she asked softly, Has he ever borrowed money from you? I laughed weakly. Borrowed, I shook my head. I practically funded his entire adult life. And suddenly, the memories started flooding back. When Ethan was 28, Caleb had used retirement savings to help him open his first real estate office. When Ethan and Monica bought their first house, I paid the down payment quietly because they were struggling. 3 years ago, Ethan came crying after a failed investment deal nearly ruined him. I just need a little help getting back on my feet, Mom. A little help had been $80,000. Money I never asked to be repaid. Because that's what mothers do. We give and give and give. Until one day, we realized people stopped seeing us as human beings and started seeing us as resources. Grace looked heartbroken listening to me. You know what the worst part is? I said quietly. What I would have helped him if he had just asked, honestly. That was the truth destroying me inside. If Ethan had sat at this kitchen table and confessed financial trouble, I would have supported him. But instead, he chose manipulation. That afternoon, my phone finally rang. Ethan. I stared at the screen for several seconds before answering. Hi, Mom. His voice sounded overly cheerful. Fake cheerful. Hi. How are you feeling? The question almost made me laugh. You tell me? Silence. Then he cleared his throat awkwardly. Listen, Monica and I were thinking maybe you shouldn't be alone right now. Of course. Not concern. Strategy. I'm managing. Well, we've been researching some really nice assisted living communities nearby. I closed my eyes slowly. There it is. What the real conversation? Mom, don't do that. Do what make me the bad guy for worrying about you. I looked across the kitchen at Grace, who was quietly pretending not to listen while organizing medication bottles near the sink. You already made yourself the bad guy, I said softly. Another silence. Longer this time. Then Ethan's voice hardened slightly. You know, Monica and I are under a lot of pressure, too. Pressure. Interesting word. I raised you without asking a child to carry my burdens. That's not fair. No, I whispered. What's not fair is trying to convince a bank your mother can't think clearly. The silence after that felt explosive. Then Ethan spoke carefully. Who told you about that nobody denies the accusation unless it's true? My chest tightened painfully. You really did it. Mom, you don't understand. No, I interrupted quietly. I understand perfectly. His voice became defensive immediately. I was trying to protect things in case something happened to you. Protect things I almost choked on the words, or protect access to my money, Jesus, Mom. There it is again, I said softly. That tone. Like I'm some difficult old woman causing problems instead of your mother. Ethan sighed heavily. You're overreacting. That sentence. Those two words. Women hear them our entire lives. When we're hurt, when we're betrayed, when someone wants to dismiss our instincts. Overreacting. I looked at the family photographs on the wall. Then I asked quietly, were you planning to sell my house too? The silence that followed answered everything. I felt something inside me crack completely. Not anger, not sadness. Something colder. Acceptance. You know what hurts most, Ethan, I whispered. What you stopped loving me long before I noticed. Mom, I'm tired now. And before he could answer, I hung up. My entire body was trembling afterward. Grace walked over slowly. You okay? No, I admitted, honestly. That was the first truly honest answer I'd given anyone in years. Grace sat beside me carefully. You know something, she said softly. People who manipulate elderly parents usually count on one thing. I looked at her. Shame. I frowned slightly. They expect you to stay quiet because you don't want to believe your own child could hurt you. Tears filled my eyes instantly because she was right. Part of me still wanted to excuse Ethan. To protect him. To protect myself from the humiliation of admitting my own son saw me as vulnerable prey. Grace reached for my hand gently. But none of this is your fault. I cried then. Really cried. Not polite tears. Not silent disappointment. Deep shaking sobs that came from years of loneliness and denial. Grace stayed beside me through all of it. And somewhere in the middle of that breakdown, another terrifying realization settled inside me. Ethan wasn't just becoming selfish. He was becoming dangerous. 3 days after our phone call, Ethan invited me to dinner. That alone should have warned me something was wrong. My son hadn't visited me in the hospital. He barely called after surgery. Yet suddenly, he wanted family time. The text arrived around noon. Monica made pot roast. Noah wants to see you. Come over tonight. No apology, no acknowledgement of what happened. Just an invitation wrapped in normalcy, like we were pretending the cracks in our family didn't exist. I stared at the message for a long time while sitting in my living room with an ice pack resting against my hip. Grace noticed immediately. You look upset. I handed her the phone. She read the text carefully before raising an eyebrow. That feels sudden. That's because it is. Are you going? I didn't answer immediately. Part of me wanted to stay home. Part of me wanted to scream at Ethan. But another part, the foolish mother part, still hoped there was something left worth saving. Noah will be there, I said quietly. Grace nodded slowly. My grandson was the one soft place still remaining in that family. At 16, Noah still hugged me when he saw me. Still asked about my favorite old movies. Still called me just to tell me about baseball games or school drama. Monica hated that closeness. I think she worried love might make Noah less ambitious. Before I left that evening, Grace helped me put on my coat near the front door. If anything feels wrong, she said carefully, you can leave. I smiled weakly. You sound like I'm walking into danger. Her expression turned strangely serious. I think you might be. The drive to Ethan's house took 20 minutes. The neighborhood looked like one of those glossy real estate magazines Monica loved. Large, modern homes, perfect landscaping, expensive SUVs sitting in spotless driveways. Ethan and Monica lived in a house bigger than the one I raised him in. Ironically, I had helped pay for it. The porch light flicked on as I slowly climbed the front steps with my cane. Before I could knock, the door swung open. Grandma Noah rushed forward immediately and wrapped his arms around me carefully. You came. For a moment, warmth spread through my chest. Yes, sweetheart. He stepped back, studying me with concern. You look tired, honest, just honest, not manipulative, not performative. I touched his cheek gently. I'm healing. Monica appeared behind him, wearing a tight smile. Giselle, she said brightly. You made it. Made it. As if attending dinner after major surgery was some grand accomplishment. The house smelled like candles and expensive food. Everything looked staged. Too clean, too polished, too intentional. Ethan walked into the foyer moments later, wearing jeans and a sweater like the perfect suburban husband. Hey, Mom. He kissed my cheek quickly. The fake normalcy made my skin crawl. Dinner started pleasantly enough. Too pleasantly. Monica poured wine. Noah talked excitedly about baseball tryouts. Ethan laughed at things that weren't funny. The entire evening felt rehearsed, like they had agreed beforehand to avoid conflict until the right moment. I barely touched my food. My hip hurt from sitting upright too long, but I refused to complain. Then halfway through dinner, Ethan leaned back casually. So, how's recovery going? There it was. The setup. Slow. I answered carefully. Monica nodded sympathetically. That's exactly why we've been worried about you. I almost laughed. Worried people usually visit hospitals. Ethan folded his hands together. We've been talking a lot about what's best long-term. Noah immediately looked uncomfortable. I noticed it right away. That told me this conversation had happened before. Just not with me? I see, I said quietly. Monica jumped in quickly. You shouldn't be alone in that big house anymore. There are wonderful assisted living communities nearby, Ethan added. Places with medical staff activities, transportation. I'm not dying, I interrupted calmly. Silence settled across the table. Monica forced another smile. Nobody said you were. But you're discussing me like I've already disappeared. Noah looked down at his plate. Ethan sighed dramatically. Mom, why do conversations with you always become emotional? That sentence hit me harder than he realized. Because when women age, people stop calling our pain real. They call it emotional. I set my fork down carefully. What exactly do you want from me tonight? Another silence. Then Ethan reached beside his chair and picked up a folder. My stomach dropped immediately. There are just a few documents we think would help simplify things. Of course, not dinner, business. I took the folder slowly. Inside were legal forms, power of attorney paperwork, financial authorization documents, property management permissions, and buried near the back home sale authorization contingencies. My chest tightened instantly. They wanted control of everything. My accounts, my house, my decisions. Monica spoke carefully, like explaining something to a child. This would just make things easier if your health declines. If. The word sounded deliberate. I looked up slowly. And who decided my health was declining? Mom, don't overreact, Ethan muttered. There was that word again. Overreact. I turned another page quietly. One line nearly made me sick. Authorized property liquidation if medically necessary. They were planning ahead already, planning for my removal from my own life. I looked directly at Ethan. You discussed selling my house before discussing it with me. He shifted uncomfortably. We're trying to be practical. Practical. What a cold word. I suddenly remembered the little boy who once cried because our dog got sick. That child would have never spoken to me this way. Monica leaned forward. You have to understand, Giselle, maintaining your home is expensive. There it was. Money. Always money. I closed the folder carefully. Then I did something unexpected. I smiled, not because I felt happy, because suddenly I understood everything clearly. And clarity can look a lot like calmness. You know, I said softly, your father used to say something interesting. Ethan frowned slightly. What he said, people reveal themselves fastest when money enters the room. The tension around the table thickened immediately. Noah looked confused now. Monica crossed her arms. That's unfair. Is it? Ethan rubbed his forehead impatiently. Mom, nobody's attacking you. No, I whispered. You're just trying to erase me politely. His face hardened instantly. That's ridiculous. Then why did you contact my bank behind my back? Dead silence. Noah looked up sharply. What? Ethan glared at me immediately. You went through my paperwork. Your paperwork. Not my accounts, not my money, your paperwork. Interesting. Monica's face paled slightly. Ethan. But it was too late now. The mask had slipped. I looked around the beautiful dining room I helped finance, the expensive chandelier, the marble countertops, the luxury watches Ethan suddenly started wearing the past few years. And for the first time, I allowed myself to wonder something ugly. How much of his life had been built using pieces of mine? Noah spoke quietly into the silence. Dad, why would Grandma need someone controlling her money? Nobody answered him. Because children still recognize truth before adults teach them how to ignore it? I slowly pushed my chair back and stood carefully with my cane. I think I should go home. Ethan immediately stood. Mom, don't be dramatic. I looked directly into my son's eyes and finally saw it clearly. Not concern, not love, fear. Fear that I was no longer easy to manipulate. I cried the entire drive home from Ethan's house. Not loudly, not dramatically, just silent tears rolling down my cheeks while streetlights blurred through the windshield. At 72 years old, you think you've already survived the worst pain life can offer. Death, illness, loss. But nothing prepares a mother for the moment she realizes her child is looking at her and seeing opportunity instead of love. When I finally pulled into my driveway, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock the front door. The house greeted me with silence again. Cold silence. I stood there in the dark foyer, staring at Caleb's photograph on the wall. "You would have known what to do," I whispered, but Caleb was gone, and I was alone. Or at least, I thought I was. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket just as I reached the staircase. A text from Grace. "Did you get home okay?" 3 simple words, yet somehow more caring than anything Ethan had said to me in weeks. I stared at the message for a long moment before replying. "Not really." The typing bubble appeared almost instantly. "Can I come by?" I should have said no. I didn't want anyone seeing me broken like that. But another part of me was tired of pretending I was fine. So I typed one word. "Please." Grace arrived 20 minutes later, wearing jeans, a gray winter coat, and exhaustion under her eyes from another 12-hour shift. But she still came. That mattered. The moment I opened the door, she took one look at my face and quietly stepped inside without asking questions. "You fought with him," she said softly. I laughed bitterly. "No, fighting requires 2 people who care." Grace set her purse down slowly. "What happened?" At first, I tried to stay composed. I really did. I made tea. I folded blankets. I pretended I was simply tired. But eventually the truth came pouring out of me in pieces. The dinner, the paperwork, the manipulation, the way Ethan kept calling me emotional every time I defended myself. Grace listened without interrupting. Not once. When I finished, the room felt painfully quiet. Then she asked gently, "What scares you most?" The answer came immediately. That maybe he never loved me as much as I loved him. The words shattered something inside me the second I said them aloud. Grace moved closer carefully. "I don't think that's true." "Then how does someone become this cold?" She hesitated before answering. "Sometimes people confuse love with entitlement." I frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Grace leaned back against the couch. "They love what you provide. Stability, money, safety, forgiveness." Her eyes softened sadly. And over time, they stopped seeing the person underneath those things. I looked down at my trembling hands. That explanation hurt because it felt real. For years, Ethan called me whenever he needed help. Financial advice, babysitting, money, support. But when was the last time he called simply because he missed me? I couldn't remember. Grace reached for her tea quietly. "You know something strange," she said after a moment. "What the patients most abandoned by family are almost always the kindest people." I looked at her. Why? Because they spent their entire lives giving without boundaries. That sentence hit me harder than she realized. Because she had just described me perfectly. I spent decades believing unconditional love meant endless sacrifice. Maybe I taught Ethan that my needs would always come second. Maybe I taught him I would forgive anything. The realization made me feel sick. Grace studied me carefully. "Can I ask you something personal?" I nodded. "When was the last time someone took care of you?" I opened my mouth to answer, then stopped. Because I genuinely didn't know. Caleb used to. Always. He noticed when I was tired before I said anything. He rubbed my shoulders while I cooked. He brought flowers home for no reason. After he died, I stopped expecting care from anyone. And slowly, people stopped offering it. Grace looked away toward the dark kitchen. My mother used to say something similar. I stayed quiet. She used to tell me that women from her generation were taught to survive quietly. Grace smiled sadly. She said everybody admired selfless mothers until those mothers became old and inconvenient. I felt tears rise again immediately. Because that was exactly it. Inconvenient. That's what aging had turned me into. An inconvenience. Grace set her cup down carefully. When my mom got sick, my brothers suddenly became experts at disappearing. Her voice remained calm, but I could hear the pain underneath it now. They always had excuses. Work, kids, stress. She shook her head slowly, but somehow she still defended them until the day she died. I looked at her gently. You loved her very much. She deserved better. The room fell quiet again. Then Grace surprised me. So do you. I stared at her. Nobody had said that to me in years, maybe decades. I looked away quickly because my eyes burned again. You barely know me. Grace smiled softly. I know enough. Something shifted inside me then. Small, but important. For the first time since surgery, I didn't feel completely invisible. After a while, Grace helped me organize the financial documents from Ethan's folder across the dining room table. She became strangely focused as she read through them carefully. Then suddenly, she stopped. What is it? I asked. Grace pointed to one page. Look at this date. I leaned closer. The bank inquiry request had been submitted nearly 3 weeks before my surgery. My stomach dropped. He planned this before I even went into the hospital. Grace nodded slowly, and probably before that. I sat back in my chair, stunned. Part of me still wanted to believe Ethan acted impulsively. But this wasn't impulsive. This was preparation. Calculated preparation. Grace looked hesitant before speaking again. Giselle, I think you need legal advice. The words made my chest tighten. You think my son would actually try to take everything? Grace didn't answer immediately. That silence alone terrified me. Finally, she spoke carefully. I've seen families destroy each other over far less money. I stared across the room at Caleb's portrait hanging above the fireplace. He built everything we had from nothing. Long nights, hard labor, sacrifice. And now our son was circling it like an inheritance instead of a legacy. Grace stood and grabbed a notepad from the kitchen counter. There's someone you should call. She wrote a name carefully. Robert Hale. I looked at the paper immediately. Caleb's old attorney. We hadn't spoken in years. He handled your husband's business accounts too, right? Grace asked. Yes. Then he already knows your financial history. I stared at the name. Fear twisted inside me. Because calling a lawyer would make this real. It would mean admitting my own son might become my enemy. Grace must have sensed my hesitation. You don't have to decide tonight, she said softly. I looked up at her. Why are you helping me this much? For the first time since I met her, Grace looked emotional herself. Because I know what happens when good people stay silent too long. Then she added quietly, and because nobody protected my mother. Those words stayed with me long after she left that night. I sat alone in the living room afterward, staring at Robert Hale's name written across the paper. Outside, snow covered the street in silence. Inside, my entire life felt like it was cracking open, and deep down, I already knew Grace was right. I called Robert Hale the next morning. My hand trembled so badly while dialing the number that I almost hung up twice before the call connected. Robert Hale speaking. His voice sounded older than I remembered, slower, rougher around the edges. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then finally, Robert, "It's Giselle Dixon." Silence, and then warmth. "Giselle," he said softly. My God. Hearing someone say my name with genuine affection nearly made me cry again. "It's been a long time," I whispered. "Too long." His tone changed slightly. "Is everything all right?" I looked down at the financial papers spread across my kitchen table. "No," I admitted honestly. "I think I need help." Robert asked me to come to his office that afternoon. Grace insisted on driving me. "You shouldn't be stressed and driving after surgery," she said firmly. I wanted to protest, but the truth was, I felt fragile in ways that had nothing to do with my hip. The drive downtown felt strangely surreal. The city looked exactly the same, while my entire life felt completely different. Robert's office sat inside an old brick building Caleb used to admire years ago. I remembered waiting there during business meetings while Ethan played with toy trucks on the lobby floor. Back then, Robert was one of Caleb's closest friends. Now I was walking into his office, terrified of my own son. Life changes so quietly sometimes. Robert himself opened the office door when we arrived. He looked older, of course. Gray hair, reading glasses hanging low on his nose, but his eyes softened the second he saw me. "Giselle." He hugged me carefully, and suddenly, I realized how long it had been since anyone embraced me without tension hiding underneath it. Robert pulled back slowly and noticed Grace beside me. "And who is this?" "This is Grace Bennett," I said. "She's been helping me." Robert immediately offered his hand warmly. "Then I owe you gratitude already." Grace smiled politely but stayed quiet. Inside the office, everything smelled like leather books and old coffee. Caleb would have loved it. The thought hurt. Robert waited patiently while I explained everything. The surgery, the hospital, Ethan ignoring me, the bank documents, the dinner, the power of attorney paperwork. As I spoke, Robert's expression grew darker and darker. By the end, he removed his glasses slowly and rubbed his forehead. "How long has this been happening?" "I don't know anymore." He leaned back heavily in his chair. "Giselle, there's something you need to understand immediately." Fear tightened inside me. "What you are significantly wealthier than Ethan likely realizes." I blinked. "What do you mean?" Robert opened a file cabinet behind his desk and removed several thick folders. "After Caleb died, a large portion of your assets remained in protected investment structures." He glanced at me carefully. "You remember that barely. After Caleb's funeral, I signed endless paperwork through tears and exhaustion. Robert handled most of it." "I trusted Caleb," I whispered, "and Caleb trusted me to protect you." Robert opened one folder and slid papers across the desk. "These are your current holdings." I stared down at the numbers and froze. Even knowing Caleb had left us comfortable, I hadn't realized the scale anymore. Rental properties, commercial investments, dividend accounts, construction company shares Caleb secretly retained before selling the business. Over the years, everything had grown enormously. Robert looked at me carefully. "Your estimated estate value now exceeds $14 million. I stared at him in complete shock. "No." "Yes." The room suddenly felt unsteady. All these years I had lived modestly. Simple clothes, simple routines. I donated quietly to charities Caleb cared about. I never touched most of the investments because I didn't need extravagance to feel secure. Meanwhile, Ethan had been circling me like I was merely a retirement account. Grace looked stunned, too. "Does Ethan know?" she asked carefully. Robert shook his head. "He knows Giselle is financially comfortable." but Caleb intentionally structured several assets privately. His expression hardened slightly, especially after Ethan's gambling issues years ago. My stomach dropped. I looked up sharply. Gambling? Robert hesitated, then sighed. Caleb didn't want to burden you with it. I felt suddenly cold. What are you talking about? Robert folded his hands together. When Ethan was 34, he accumulated substantial debt through speculative investment groups and sports betting. I stared at him speechless. No. He came to Caleb for help. Memories rushed back instantly. The year Caleb liquidated part of his retirement unexpectedly. The stress, the arguments behind closed doors. I never knew why. Robert's voice remained calm. Your husband paid off the debt quietly to protect Ethan's family. Tears filled my eyes immediately. Caleb had protected our son, even from me. And now, Ethan was trying to exploit the mother who sacrificed beside him. I looked away quickly. How bad was it? Nearly $600,000. Grace inhaled sharply beside me. I couldn't breathe for a second. That's impossible. It happened. The office fell silent. Then another realization hit me. Is he in trouble again? Robert's expression answered before his words did. I believe so. Everything suddenly made horrifying sense. The pressure, the manipulation, the sudden urgency to control my assets. Monica pushing the house sale. This wasn't random greed anymore. This was desperation. I covered my mouth with trembling fingers. My God. Robert leaned forward gently. Giselle, listen carefully to me. Ethan may still love you in whatever damaged way he's capable of. But financially desperate people make dangerous choices. The exact same warning Grace gave me. Dangerous. I closed my eyes briefly. How could Caleb hide this from me? Because he knew you'd forgive Ethan instantly. Robert's voice softened. Your husband worried your compassion would destroy your financial security one day. That sentence cut deeply because it felt true. Grace reached over quietly and squeezed my hand. I looked at the paperwork again. Millions of dollars, properties, investments, enough money to change lives. And suddenly, I understood why Ethan was becoming aggressive. He wasn't just trying to help. He thought he was securing an inheritance. Robert opened another folder carefully. There's more. I looked up weakly. What now? Your current will leaves almost everything directly to Ethan. Of course it did. He was my son. Or at least the version of him I still believed existed when I signed it years ago. Robert studied my face carefully. You need to decide whether that still reflects your wishes. The question hung heavily in the room. Did I still want Ethan controlling everything Caleb built after what he'd done? After the lies, after the manipulation, after abandoning me when I was helpless? I looked down at my wedding ring. Caleb spent his entire life protecting me. Maybe it was finally time I protected myself. Robert spoke carefully. If you want to make changes, we can begin immediately. I looked at Grace. She immediately shook her head softly. Not because she disagreed, because she didn't want influence over my decision. That mattered more than she realized. I turned back toward Robert slowly. Yes, I whispered. His expression sharpened slightly. Yes. What? For the first time in weeks, my voice felt steady. I want to change everything. After meeting with Robert Hale, something inside me changed. Not dramatically, not all at once, but quietly, like a lock clicking shut. For weeks, I had cried over Ethan's behavior. I kept searching for excuses to explain it away. Stress, financial pressure, Monica's influence. But now I knew the truth. My son had been planning around my weakness before I even entered surgery. And the most painful part wasn't the greed. It was the deception. The pretending. The fake concern wrapped around manipulation. Grace drove me home from Robert's office in silence at first. Snow drifted slowly across the windshield while Columbus disappeared beneath gray skies. Finally, she glanced at me carefully. "How are you feeling?" I stared out the window. Like I buried another person today. She didn't ask what I meant. Maybe because she already understood. That evening, I sat alone in my living room, holding an old photograph of Ethan as a child. He couldn't have been older than 7. In the picture, he was covered in flour because Caleb let him help bake cookies for Christmas. His tiny hands rested proudly on his hips while he smiled at the camera with complete joy. I traced my finger across the photograph. How does a little boy who once cried over injured birds grow into a man capable of emotionally abandoning his own mother? I still didn't know. But for the first time, I stopped blaming myself for it. Around 8 that night, my phone rang. "Ethan." I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. "Hello, Mom." His tone sounded tense already. No warmth, no apology, just irritation. "How was your day?" I nearly laughed. "You suddenly care." A pause. Then Robert Hale called me. Of course he did. Not because he betrayed me, because Ethan had apparently contacted him earlier regarding future estate management. Robert likely realized immediately something was wrong. I leaned back slowly in my chair. "I see," Ethan exhaled sharply. "You met with him behind my back?" The audacity of that question stunned me. "Behind your back," I repeated quietly. "You tried to access my accounts behind mine. That's different." "No," I said calmly. "It really isn't." His voice hardened immediately. "Mom, you're making terrible decisions right now." Interesting. Not emotional decisions anymore. Terrible decisions, because suddenly I wasn't cooperating. I looked around my quiet living room. Caleb's old recliner still sat near the fireplace exactly where he left it before he died. I suddenly wished he were there beside me. Not to protect me, but to witness what our son had become. "What exactly are you afraid of, Ethan?" I asked softly. "I'm afraid you're letting strangers manipulate you." There it was. Strangers. Meaning Grace. Meaning Robert. Anyone threatening his access. Nobody's manipulating me. "Really?" he snapped. "Then why are you suddenly acting paranoid?" The old me would have backed down at that tone. The old me would have cried. But now something colder steadied me. "Do you know what paranoia is?" I asked quietly. "It's when someone thinks danger exists without evidence." Ethan stayed silent. "I have evidence." His breathing changed slightly on the other end. Then he said something that finally shattered the last fragile piece of denial inside me. "You're not thinking clearly anymore." The room went completely still. There it was, the strategy. Not concern, not love. Discredit me, make me sound unstable. Easier to control elderly women once people believe we're confused. I closed my eyes slowly. "Do you actually hear yourself anymore?" "You're proving my point right now." "My point," I whispered. "You mean the point where you convince everyone your mother is mentally incompetent so you can control her estate?" "Jesus Christ, Mom!" "No!" I interrupted sharply for the first time in weeks. "You listen to me now." The silence that followed felt electric. I stood slowly despite the pain in my hip. "For weeks I blamed Monica," I said quietly. "I told myself, maybe she pushed you into this." "Mom, but this is you." Another silence. Then Ethan's voice became frighteningly cold. You have no idea how hard my life is right now. The honesty in that sentence startled me. Not because he admitted struggle, because there was no guilt in his voice anymore, only resentment. What happened to the money I gave you 3 years ago? Silence. My stomach tightened. What happened, Ethan? I invested it. And another pause. Then finally, it didn't work out. I gripped the edge of the table tightly. How bad his answer came quietly. Very bad. I suddenly understood everything. The pressure, the manipulation, the urgency. He wasn't just greedy. He was drowning. But instead of asking for help honestly, he decided to position himself for inheritance. I felt physically sick. You were planning for me to die? I whispered. That's not fair. No. My voice cracked slightly now. Then why did you already prepare property liquidation forms? I was trying to think ahead. You were trying to secure assets. The truth exploded between us finally. Raw. Ugly. Real. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then, Ethan muttered quietly. You have no idea what kind of pressure I'm under. I laughed bitterly. You know what pressure is. My eyes filled with tears. Pressure is burying your husband and still finding the strength to raise a child alone. Silence. Pressure is working double shifts while pretending everything's okay so your son never feels poor. I could barely breathe now. Pressure is sacrificing your own retirement so your child can build a future. My voice dropped lower. And you know what hurts most? Ethan said nothing. I would still have helped you. That silence told me everything. Because deep down, Ethan knew it too. If he had come to me honestly, I would have saved him again. But greed changes people. It makes honesty feel unnecessary. Finally, Ethan spoke again, softer this time. You don't understand, Monica. There it was. Blame shifting. She expects a certain life. I almost laughed through my tears. So you decided your mother should pay for it? That's not what I'm saying. It's exactly what you're saying. I sat back down, slowly exhausted. For the first time in my life, I felt older than my years. Not physically, spiritually, like something sacred inside me had aged overnight. Then Ethan made one final mistake. If you leave everything to outsiders instead of family, he said carefully, people are going to question your mental state. The threat hung quietly in the air, subtle, but unmistakable. I froze, because suddenly I realized this could become uglier than I imagined, much uglier. I spoke very calmly after that. You should leave me alone for a while. Mom, I mean it. Then I hung up. My entire body trembled afterward. Not from weakness, from clarity. Ethan wasn't just desperate anymore. He was becoming hostile. A few minutes later, another message appeared on my phone. Not from Ethan, from Noah. Grandma, are you okay? Tears immediately filled my eyes again. One person in that family still cared whether I was hurting. I typed back slowly. I'm okay, sweetheart. But even as I sent the message, I realized I was lying, because nothing about my life felt okay anymore. The fall happened just after midnight. I remember because the old clock in the hallway had chimed 12 only moments earlier. I had gone downstairs to make tea because I couldn't sleep again. My mind kept replaying every conversation with Ethan like a wound I couldn't stop touching. The kitchen light felt too bright against my tired eyes as I slowly moved toward the stove with my cane. Everything hurt lately. My hip, my back, my heart. I reached for the kettle, and then my sock slid slightly against the hardwood floor. It happened fast. Too fast. 1 second, I was standing, The next pain exploded through my hip as I crashed sideways against the counter before hitting the floor hard enough to knock the breath out of me. A scream tore from my throat. For several terrifying seconds, I couldn't breathe. The pain felt unbearable, sharp, blinding. Panic flooded through me immediately. I tried to push myself up, but nearly blacked out from the pain. Oh, God. My hands shook violently as I reached for my phone on the counter above me. It took 3 attempts before I managed to grab it. I called Ethan first. Of course I did, because no matter how broken things become, mothers still instinctively reach for their children. The phone rang, and rang, and rang. No answer. I called again, straight to voicemail. I stared at the screen in disbelief while tears filled my eyes. "Please," I whispered, "please pick up." Nothing. The house suddenly felt enormous around me. Cold, silent, dangerously silent. For one horrible moment, I imagined dying alone on that kitchen floor while my son slept peacefully 30 minutes away. My breathing became shaky. Then another name appeared in my mind. Grace. I hesitated before calling her. It was after midnight. She worked exhausting shifts already, but the pain became unbearable again, and finally I pressed dial. She answered before the second ring. Giselle, instant concern. Wide awake instantly. "I'm sorry," I gasped. "I fell." Her voice sharpened immediately. "Are you hurt?" "Yes. I'm coming right now." No hesitation, no sigh, no inconvenience, just immediate action. I started crying the moment she said it. 20 minutes later, headlights swept across my living room windows. Then hurried footsteps. The front door opened after I weakly called out. Grace rushed into the kitchen wearing sweatpants, boots, and a winter coat thrown hastily over a t-shirt. Her hair was messy like she had gotten out of bed seconds after my call. "Oh my God," she breathed, kneeling beside me immediately. The fear in her face looked more genuine than anything Ethan had shown me in months. "Don't move yet," she said gently. Her hands carefully checked my shoulder, hip, and arm while she spoke calmly to keep me steady. "I think I twisted the surgical side," I whispered through tears. Okay. We're going to get you checked." I looked at her weakly. "You came." Grace paused for half a second. Then she looked almost confused by the statement. "Of course I came," as if there had never been another possibility. The tears returned harder after that. Grace helped me into her car slowly before driving me back to the emergency room. The city looked empty at that hour. Streetlights reflected against snow-covered roads, while pain pulsed through my body with every bump. Grace kept one hand lightly on my arm at stoplights. Not dramatic, just steady, grounding. Inside the ER, everything blurred together. Bright lights, questions, wheelchairs, X-rays. At one point, a doctor asked who was there with me. Before I could answer, Grace said quietly, "I am." 3 simple words, but they settled somewhere deep inside me. Hours later, the doctor confirmed I hadn't broken the hip again, but I had badly strained the surrounding muscles. "You're lucky," he said. Another inch, and this could have been much worse. Lucky. Funny word. Because lying there in that hospital bed again, I suddenly realized something painful. If I hadn't called Grace, nobody would have come. While the nurse adjusted my IV, I noticed Grace sitting nearby in the uncomfortable plastic chair beside my bed. Her head leaned back slightly against the wall. Exhaustion covered her face. "You should go home," I whispered. She opened her eyes immediately. "No, you have work tomorrow. I'll survive." Guilt twisted inside me. I'm becoming too much trouble. Grace's expression changed instantly, almost angry. "Don't say that." I looked away. "But it's true." "No," she said firmly. It's what people made you believe. The room went quiet after that. I stared at the ceiling for a long moment before speaking again. Ethan didn't answer. Grace stayed silent carefully. I called him twice. Still silence. Then finally, "I'm sorry." I laughed weakly. "So am I." Around 4 in the morning, the ER became quieter. Machines beeped softly around us while snow continued falling outside the windows. Grace stood to grab coffee from the vending machine down the hall. When she returned, she handed me the warm cup carefully. "You know," she said softly, "my mom used to say, hospitals reveal who people truly are." I looked at her. "What do you mean, people show up, or they don't? That simple? That brutal?" I looked down at the coffee in my hands. Grace had shown up every single time. Ethan hadn't. The truth felt impossible to ignore now. A few hours later, my phone buzzed unexpectedly. "Ethan." I stared at the screen while anger and heartbreak twisted together inside me. Finally, I answered, "Mom. Sorry, I was asleep. Asleep." I closed my eyes briefly. I fell. Silence. Then I was on the kitchen floor for almost 20 minutes. Another silence. "Are you okay?" The question came too late. Grace quietly stood up and stepped away to give me privacy. I watched her through blurry eyes while Ethan spoke again. "You should have called 911. I called you." That silence again. Heavy now, uncomfortable. Then Ethan sighed. "Well, at least you're all right." At least. I suddenly realized he sounded relieved about something else. Not my safety. Avoiding responsibility. "I'm at the hospital," I said quietly. "You're back in the hospital?" "Yes." "Which one?" The question sharpened my instincts immediately. Not concern. Calculation. I suddenly imagined him rushing there not out of love, but fear that something might happen before he regained control of my estate. The realization made me cold. "I'm tired, Ethan." "Mom, wait. I'll talk to you later." Then I hung up. When I looked up again, Grace was watching me carefully from across the room. "You okay?" I stared at her for a long moment, then quietly asked, "Why do strangers keep treating me better than my own son?" Grace looked heartbroken hearing that question, but she answered honestly, "Because kindness has nothing to do with blood." The words settled deep inside me, and for the first time, I truly believed them. Later that morning, while waiting for discharge paperwork, another surprise arrived. Noah walked into the ER carrying flowers. He looked terrified the moment he saw me in the hospital bed. "Grandma." I burst into tears instantly, because out of everyone in my family, the only one who came running was a 16-year-old boy. 3 days after my fall, I sat in Robert Hale's office again, but this time felt different. The fear was still there, the heartbreak too. Yet, underneath both emotions, something stronger had begun growing quietly inside me. Resolve. For the first time in my life, I wasn't sitting in that office as someone's wife or someone's mother. I was sitting there as myself. And strangely enough, that realization felt both empowering and deeply sad. Grace sat beside me again, though farther back this time, almost respectfully distant. She never inserted herself into decisions unless I asked for her opinion. That mattered more than she probably realized. Too many people around money become eager, curious, entitled? Grace never did. Robert adjusted his glasses and spread several legal documents across his desk carefully. "I reviewed everything thoroughly," he said. "And before we proceed, I need to ask you one final time." I nodded slowly. "Are you absolutely certain you want to change your will?" The room became very quiet. Outside the office window, snow drifted softly through downtown Columbus, while traffic crawled beneath gray skies. I thought about Ethan. About the little boy who once brought me dandelions from the backyard because he thought they looked beautiful. About the teenager who cried after Caleb's funeral and promised me, "I'll take care of you forever, Mom." And then I thought about the man who ignored my calls after surgery. The man preparing paperwork behind my back. The man who sounded more worried about my estate than my pain. My throat tightened painfully, but my answer remained the same. Yes. Robert studied my face carefully before nodding once. All right. He opened another folder. I drafted several options based on our conversation. I looked down at the paperwork slowly. Trust structures, property distributions, medical directives, charitable foundations. The language felt overwhelming at first. Then one line caught my eye. The Ellis Recovery Foundation. I looked up. Ellis Roberts smiled faintly. Your maiden name? You mentioned wanting something separate from the Dixon legacy. Emotion rushed into my chest unexpectedly. Ellis, my father's name, the name I carried before marriage, before sacrifice swallowed most of my identity. I touched the paper gently. It sounds peaceful, I whispered. Robert nodded. You said you wanted your money to protect vulnerable elderly people. I did, because suddenly I couldn't stop thinking about all the lonely people sitting in hospital rooms, waiting for children who never arrived. Women like me. Men abandoned after strokes. Widows forgotten after surgeries. People who spent their entire lives loving others only to age into invisibility. Grace looked emotional, reading through the proposal too. There would be recovery housing? She asked quietly. Robert nodded. Yes. Rehabilitation assistance, temporary home care, transportation, medical advocacy. I closed my eyes briefly. Caleb would have loved this idea. He always believed money meant nothing unless it helped someone. Then Robert carefully slid another document toward me. And this addresses your personal estate distribution? My heartbeat slowed slightly. This was the hard part. I looked down. The majority of my wealth would go into the foundation and long-term care programs. Several educational trusts for local nursing students were included too. Then my eyes moved lower. Grace Bennett? A private inheritance allocation? I immediately looked up. No. Grace blinked. No, I didn't ask for this, she said quickly. Robert remained calm. I added it because Giselle specifically requested personal recognition beyond the foundation structure. Grace turned toward me immediately. Giselle, you don't owe me anything. That sentence alone told me exactly why she deserved it. I smiled sadly. That's precisely why I want to. Grace shook her head firmly. You already pay me whenever I help you. You know that's not true. The room fell quiet again. I looked directly at her. You stayed when my own family walked away. Her eyes filled slightly with tears. But that doesn't mean... Yes, I interrupted softly. It does. I took a slow breath. Grace, you treated me like a human being when I had almost forgotten I still was one. She looked away immediately after that, overwhelmed, uncomfortable, not greedy, just emotional. And again, that mattered deeply to me. Robert cleared his throat gently before continuing. There's one final issue. I turned back toward him. Ethan. The name alone exhausted me now. What about him? Robert folded his hands carefully. Legally completely disinheriting immediate family can increase the likelihood of challenges in probate court, meaning Ethan could fight the will. Of course he could. Robert continued, especially if he attempts to argue diminished mental capacity. The exact strategy Ethan already hinted at. Anger flickered through me immediately. He would actually do that. Neither Robert nor Grace answered. Their silence felt like confirmation. Robert slid another paper toward me. This is why I strongly recommend leaving him something symbolic. I looked down at the proposal. A modest financial allocation, tiny compared to the rest of the estate. And beneath it, a handwritten personal letter to be delivered privately. I frowned slightly. A letter, Robert nodded. Sometimes words carry more weight than money. The idea settled into me slowly. Maybe he was right. Maybe Ethan didn't need more financial rescue. Maybe he needed truth. Real truth. The kind nobody in our family had spoken aloud in years. I stared out the office window again. When Caleb died, I said quietly, I thought my job was keeping Ethan safe forever. Grace listened silently, but maybe protecting someone from consequences only teaches them they deserve rescuing. My voice cracked slightly. And maybe that's partly my fault. Grace immediately shook her head. No. I looked at her. You raised him with love. What he chose afterward belongs to him. I wanted to believe that. God, I wanted to believe that. Because mothers carry guilt like second skin. Every failure of our children feels connected to us somehow. Robert leaned back carefully. There's another matter we should discuss. I sighed softly. What now, medical authority? My stomach tightened immediately. If something happens to you unexpectedly, who makes healthcare decisions? The answer should have been Ethan. But suddenly, the thought terrified me. I imagined him standing over my hospital bed calculating property values while machines beeped around me. The image made me physically ill. Robert spoke gently. You don't have to answer immediately. But I already knew the answer. Slowly, I turned toward Grace. Her eyes widened instantly. Giselle, I trust you. She looked horrified by the weight of those words. That's too much responsibility. No, I whispered. It's trust. Grace's eyes filled completely now. I don't want your son thinking I manipulated you. I almost laughed sadly. He already thinks that. The room grew quiet again. Then Robert spoke carefully. You should both understand something. This decision will likely create conflict once Ethan discovers the changes. Conflict. Such a clean word for something uglier. War between family. I looked down at the papers one final time. The foundation, the housing programs, the nursing scholarships, Grace's inheritance, Ethan's letter. And suddenly, I realized something strange. For the first time in years, I felt peaceful. Not because I stopped loving my son, but because I finally stopped sacrificing myself to prove it. I picked up the pen slowly, then signed my name, Giselle Dixon. And in that moment, my future officially stopped belonging to Ethan. The second hospitalization nearly killed me. Not physically, emotionally. It started 2 weeks after I signed the new will. At first, I blamed the exhaustion on stress. I wasn't sleeping properly anymore. My appetite disappeared. Even small movements left me drained. Grace noticed before I admitted anything. You're pale, she said one evening while helping me organize medication in the kitchen. I'm 72, I joked weakly. Pale comes with the package. But Grace didn't smile. You're shaking. I looked down. She was right. My hands trembled slightly against the countertop. I'm fine. The lie sounded unconvincing even to me. Over the next 3 days, things worsened quickly. Fever, dizziness, shortness of breath. Then one morning, I woke up unable to stand without nearly collapsing. Grace arrived after her shift and immediately frowned. "We're going to the hospital. I don't want to." Giselle. That tone again. Firm. Protective. The kind tone people use when they care whether you live. I was too weak to argue. The ER admitted me almost immediately. Post-surgical infection. The doctor explained everything carefully while adjusting my chart. "We caught it early," he said. "But your body's been under significant stress." Stress. Interesting how the body eventually exposes emotional pain physically. By that evening, I was back in another hospital room staring at another ceiling while machines beeped softly around me. I felt numb, exhausted in a way deeper than physical tiredness. Grace stayed beside me long after visiting hours should have ended. "You should go home," I murmured weakly. "I'll leave after you sleep. You've practically lived here lately." She adjusted my blanket gently. "Then it's a good thing I like hospitals." I smiled faintly despite myself. That woman somehow kept finding ways to make difficult moments softer. Around midnight, I finally drifted asleep. When I woke again, sometime later, voices echoed quietly outside my room. One voice made my stomach tighten instantly. "Ethan." I froze. My body suddenly felt cold despite the blankets. Another voice answered him. "Robert Hale." Confusion flooded through me immediately. Why was Robert here? I stayed completely still as their conversation drifted through the partially open doorway. "I'm just asking hypothetically," Ethan said carefully. Robert's voice sounded irritated. "There's nothing hypothetical about your mother being hospitalized. I'm worried about her." The fake concern in Ethan's voice made my skin crawl now. "I'm sure you are," Robert replied flatly. Silence. Then Ethan lowered his voice further. "If something happens, are her affairs in order?" My chest tightened so painfully I thought I might stop breathing. Affairs, not recovery, not health. Affairs. Robert answered slowly. "Your mother is alive, Ethan. I know that. Then perhaps your focus should remain there." Another silence. Then Ethan spoke again. "I just need to know if she changed anything legally." There it was. The real reason he came. Not love. Fear. Fear of losing access. I covered my mouth with trembling fingers as tears burned my eyes. Even lying in a hospital bed, fighting infection. My son was thinking about inheritance. Not me. The worst part wasn't shock anymore. It was confirmation. The door opened quietly moments later. I shut my eyes instantly. Pretending to sleep suddenly felt easier than facing him. I heard Ethan step into the room slowly. Then silence. I imagined him standing there looking at me. Maybe guilty, maybe calculating, maybe both. Finally, he spoke softly. "You look terrible. Not mom. Not, are you okay? Just observation." I kept my breathing steady. Then another voice entered the room. "Grace? What are you doing here?" Her tone turned cold immediately. Interesting. I had never heard Grace sound cold toward anyone before. Ethan sighed. "I came to see my mother. At 1 a.m, I don't need permission." Grace didn't answer immediately. "Then she needs rest. And you're what exactly?" Ethan snapped quietly. "Her nurse or her bodyguard." The tension in the room thickened instantly. I remained still with my eyes closed, heart pounding painfully. Grace spoke calmly. "I'm the person who actually showed up." Silence exploded after that sentence. Even Ethan seemed stunned. Finally, he muttered bitterly. "She's turning you against me?" Grace laughed softly. "No, Ethan. Your actions did that all by themselves." I heard movement near the bed. Then Ethan's voice lowered. You think I don't see what's happening? I could practically feel Grace glaring at him now. What exactly do you think is happening? You're getting close to a wealthy, vulnerable woman. The accusation made my stomach twist. Grace's voice remained frighteningly calm. If I cared about money, I wouldn't work double shifts at a public hospital. Another silence. Then Ethan spoke more quietly. She's my mother. Grace answered immediately. Then why does she cry every time you leave? The room fell completely silent after that, because there was no defense against truth spoken plainly. A few seconds later, I heard footsteps moving toward the door. Then Ethan stopped. I know she changed the will, he said quietly. My entire body stiffened beneath the blankets. Grace didn't answer. She wouldn't have done that alone. Still silence. Then Ethan added something that chilled me completely. If people start questioning her mental condition, things could get very messy. Threat. Clearer this time, not subtle anymore. Before Grace could respond, another voice appeared in the doorway. Robert. That would be a remarkably foolish decision, Ethan. The tension became suffocating instantly. Robert continued calmly, especially considering I personally documented your mother's competency evaluations during every legal revision. Silence. You'd lose, Robert said simply. I heard Ethan exhale sharply, then footsteps. The door opened and closed. He was gone. A few seconds later, I finally opened my eyes. Grace stood near the doorway with tears of anger shining in her eyes. Robert looked exhausted, and suddenly I couldn't hold my own tears back anymore. He came here for my money, I whispered. Nobody tried denying it this time, because we all knew the truth already. Grace walked over immediately and took my hand gently. You're not alone. I started crying harder after that, not because of Ethan anymore, because I suddenly realized how strange life was. The woman holding my hand wasn't related to me. The lawyer protecting me wasn't family by blood. Yet somehow, they cared more about my well-being than my own son did. Robert pulled a chair closer beside the bed. Giselle, he said carefully, I need you to listen to me very closely. I wiped my eyes weakly. You are protected legally. I nodded slowly, but emotional protection matters too. The words settled heavily inside me. Because he was right. Legal documents could secure my assets, but they couldn't protect my heart from grieving the son I thought I raised. Grace squeezed my hand softly again. Then she said something I would never forget. Sometimes mourning someone while they're still alive is the hardest grief of all. And lying there, in that hospital bed, I realized I was no longer fighting to save my relationship with Ethan. I was grieving its death. I invited everyone to my house 2 weeks after leaving the hospital. Robert insisted we do it formally. In person, he said. No misunderstandings, no manipulation afterward. So the meeting was scheduled for Saturday afternoon. And somehow, despite everything that had happened, my hands still shook while preparing for it. That surprised me. You would think betrayal eventually hardens a person, but it doesn't. Not completely. Especially not when the person hurting you is your child. The morning of the meeting, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, studying my reflection carefully. I looked older than I remembered. The past few months had carved exhaustion into my face. But something else stared back at me too. Strength. Quiet strength. The kind born only after surviving heartbreak. Grace arrived early to help me prepare. You don't have to do this today if you're not ready, she said gently while arranging teacups in the kitchen. Yes, I answered softly. I do, because I was tired of fear. Tired of manipulation, tired of pretending everything was normal, while my son slowly tried to dismantle my independence piece by piece. Today would end it. one way or another. At exactly 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang. My stomach tightened instantly. Grace looked at me carefully. "You okay?" "No," I admitted honestly. Then I opened the door. Ethan stood there wearing an expensive charcoal coat while Monica lingered beside him with forced politeness stretched across her face. Noah stood slightly behind them, looking nervous. The moment he saw me, he hugged me tightly. "You look better?" he whispered. I nearly cried from those simple words alone, because he noticed me. Not my money, not my house. Me. "Thank you for coming," I said softly. Ethan glanced around the house immediately after stepping inside, observing, calculating. The behavior made my stomach twist now because I recognized it so clearly. A few minutes later, Robert arrived carrying a leather folder. The atmosphere changed the moment Ethan saw him. His jaw tightened slightly. Monica crossed her arms immediately. Nobody said it aloud, but suddenly everyone understood this wasn't a casual family gathering. This was business. And business inside families is almost always ugly. We all sat in the living room together. The same living room where Caleb once played Christmas music too loudly, while Ethan opened presents on the floor. Now tension filled every corner of it. Robert finally broke the silence. "Thank you all for coming." Monica exchanged a quick glance with Ethan. "What exactly is this about?" she asked carefully. Robert opened the folder calmly. Giselle requested a formal review of her updated estate planning decisions. Silence. Then Ethan looked at me sharply. "You changed your will." "Not Mom. Why not? Are you okay?" Straight to the will. The reaction alone proved I made the right decision. I folded my hands quietly in my lap. "Yes." Monica's face tightened instantly. "When a few weeks ago." Ethan leaned back, slowly staring at me like he no longer recognized the woman sitting in front of him. "What exactly changed?" Robert answered before I could. Significantly. The room became painfully still. Noah looked confused now. "Dad," he whispered softly. But Ethan ignored him completely. Robert continued calmly. "The majority of Giselle Dixon's estate will now be transferred into charitable and protected recovery foundations supporting elderly patients abandoned or neglected during medical recovery." Monica blinked. What I looked directly at her. "I decided my money should help people who feel forgotten." Ethan's expression darkened immediately. "And who convinced you to do that?" There it was. Always someone else controlling me in his mind. Never my own decisions. "Nobody convinced me," I answered quietly. Robert continued reading. "Additional educational grants and nursing support programs have also been established." Grace sat very still beside the fireplace, uncomfortable already. Then Robert reached the final pages. "And designated oversight authority for the Ellis Recovery Foundation has been granted to Grace Bennett." The silence afterward felt explosive. Monica turned sharply toward Grace. "You're kidding." Grace immediately shook her head. "I didn't know the details." But Ethan was already staring at her with open fury now. "You manipulated my mother." "No," I interrupted calmly. "She didn't." "You expect me to believe this happened naturally?" I held his gaze steadily. "You abandoned me naturally." That shut him up for exactly 3 seconds. Then Monica exploded first. "This is insane, Giselle. Interesting. Not hurt. Not emotional. Angry. Because money was leaving their reach." "You're giving family assets to a stranger?" I looked directly at her. The stranger stayed beside my hospital bed. Monica's face flushed immediately. "You can't seriously punish Ethan over one misunderstanding." "One misunderstanding," I repeated softly. I suddenly felt exhausted. Not physically, spiritually, because they still refused to acknowledge what they had done. You contacted banks behind my back, I said quietly to Ethan. You prepared liquidation paperwork. You discussed putting me into assisted living before I even healed from surgery. Ethan rubbed his forehead aggressively. You're twisting everything. No, Robert interrupted sharply. The documentation speaks for itself. Ethan glared at him immediately. You should have never let her change those documents. Robert's expression turned icy. Your mother is fully competent legally and mentally. Monica laughed bitterly. She's being emotionally manipulated by a nurse she barely knows. Grace finally spoke then, very quietly. I never asked for anything. That was true. Every person in the room knew it. Grace never pushed, never hinted, never demanded, which somehow made Ethan even angrier. She got close to you for money, he snapped at me. I stared at my son in disbelief. No, I whispered. She got close to me because I was lonely. Silence, heavy silence. Then I said the sentence I had carried inside me for months. Love showed up for me wearing scrubs. The room froze completely. Even Noah looked emotional now. Ethan stood abruptly. This is unbelievable. I looked up at him slowly. No. What's unbelievable is lying in a hospital bed wondering why your own son won't answer the phone. His face hardened instantly. You think I'm some monster now. I swallowed hard. I think you stopped seeing me as your mother. That landed. I saw it hit him, briefly, like guilt trying to surface before pride crushed it again. Then Robert spoke carefully. There is one final component. The room went silent again. Robert removed a sealed envelope from the folder. This letter is designated specifically for Ethan Dixon. Ethan stared at it suspiciously. What is that? I answered softly. The only inheritance that might still save you. He looked genuinely confused for the first time all afternoon. But I wasn't talking about money anymore. I was talking about truth. Real truth. The kind families avoid until destruction forces it into the open. Monica suddenly stood up too. You know what, fine? If this is how you want to treat your own son? My own son, I interrupted quietly, treated me like a financial inconvenience. Her mouth snapped shut. Noah looked at his father then, really looked at him. And I think that was the moment Ethan finally understood something terrifying. He wasn't just losing money. He was losing the image of himself as a good man. The room stayed silent after my last words. Heavy silence. The kind that settles over people when truth has finally stripped away every excuse. Ethan stood near the fireplace staring at me like he no longer knew who I was. Maybe he didn't. Because mothers eventually change when heartbreak becomes impossible to ignore. Monica recovered first. She always did. Her anger sharpened quickly while everyone else was still emotionally stunned. This is unbelievable, she snapped. You're throwing away your relationship with your son over some nurse who played the long game. Grace lowered her eyes immediately. Not guilty, just uncomfortable. Even now, she hated conflict. I looked directly at Monica. You know what the difference is between you and Grace. Monica crossed her arms. What? Grace never once asked me for anything. The words landed hard, because everyone in the room knew they were true. Ethan finally spoke again, voice tight with frustration. You really think she cares about you? I almost laughed. The tragedy was that Ethan genuinely no longer understood what care looked like unless money was attached to it. She drove to my house at midnight after I fell, I answered quietly. You didn't even answer your phone." His face darkened instantly. "I said I was asleep." "You were always asleep when I needed you." That sentence hit deeper than I intended. I saw it in his eyes. A flash of guilt, but pride swallowed it immediately afterward. "You're acting like I abandoned you." I stared at him in disbelief. "Ethan, you left me alone after surgery. You had nurses. I had strangers." My voice cracked slightly now. "And somehow, the strangers treated me with more love than my own son." Noah looked down at the floor immediately after hearing that. I could tell he hated being there, hated watching his family collapse in front of him. Robert finally stepped forward calmly. "I think everyone needs to lower their voices." But Monica was beyond calm now. She pointed directly at Grace. "You knew exactly what you were doing." Grace looked stunned. "No, I didn't." "Oh, please," Monica snapped. "Women like you always target vulnerable elderly people." The cruelty of the accusation made my stomach twist. Before Grace could respond, I stood slowly, despite the pain still lingering in my hip. "That's enough." The room went quiet instantly, because for the first time in years, I sounded angry. Not emotional, not fragile. Angry. I looked directly at Monica. "You know what's interesting?" She said nothing. "The only people obsessed with my money are the people accusing others of wanting it." Her face flushed immediately. Ethan stepped in quickly. "Mom, stop." "No," I said sharply. "You stop?" The force in my own voice startled even me. Years of silence suddenly cracked open all at once. "You don't get to manipulate me anymore." Ethan rubbed his face aggressively. "You're blowing this out of proportion." Robert sighed quietly. "Ethan, the documentation speaks for itself." But Ethan was spiraling now. Cornered people often become crueler. "I made mistakes," he snapped. "Fine. But this?" He gestured wildly toward Grace. "This is insane." Grace finally spoke again softly. "You don't have to like me. I don't. But your mother deserves people who show up for her." That sentence exploded something inside Ethan. "Oh, spare me the saint act." "Ethan," I warned quietly. "No, Mom." "You want honesty?" "Fine." His breathing became heavier now. "I'm drowning." The confession stunned the room silent. Even Monica looked shocked. He said it aloud. Ethan laughed bitterly and paced across the living room. "You think I wanted things to get this bad?" I watched him carefully. For the first time in months, I saw fear instead of arrogance. Real fear. "My investments collapsed," he admitted hoarsely. "The market turned. I lost clients. The house is leveraged almost to the ceiling." Monica looked horrified now. "Ethan." "No," he interrupted bitterly. "Let's stop pretending." His eyes shifted toward me again. I couldn't fix it. The room felt painfully still. Part of me wanted to comfort him instinctively. That's what motherhood does. Even wounded mothers still ache when their children suffer. But then, I remembered the paperwork, the manipulation, the hospital, the threats. "You could have told me the truth," I whispered. His expression twisted immediately. "And say what? Hey, Mom, I destroyed my finances. Can I have more money?" Yes. The answer shocked him. I stepped closer slowly. "Yes, Ethan, you could have." Tears burned my eyes now. "I would have helped you." Silence. Deep silence, because we both knew it was true. I would have helped him. Again, and again, and again. But instead of honesty, he chose entitlement. Instead of vulnerability, he chose manipulation. Ethan's face crumpled slightly for the first time. I was scared. The words sounded almost childlike suddenly. Small, lost. But Monica immediately interrupted. Fear doesn't justify giving everything away to strangers. I turned toward her slowly. No, I agreed softly. But greed doesn't justify destroying your mother either. That finally shut her up. Robert stepped beside the coffee table and calmly opened another folder. There's something else everyone here deserves to see. Ethan frowned immediately. What now? Robert removed printed documents carefully. Bank inquiries, property transfer drafts, email chains. Every piece of evidence Ethan hoped remained hidden. He placed them slowly across the table. One by one, he said calmly, "These documents demonstrate deliberate attempts to establish financial control over Giselle Dixon without transparent consent." Monica stared at the papers in horror. Noah looked sick. Ethan said nothing, because there was nothing left to deny. Robert continued quietly. These actions would have become legally problematic very quickly. I watched Ethan's face pale. For the first time, I think he truly understood how far he had gone. Not emotionally, legally, morally, humanly. Then Noah spoke, very softly. "Dad." Everyone looked at him. The boy's eyes were full of tears now. Grandma was crying in the hospital. Ethan froze completely. Noah swallowed hard. "She kept checking her phone, waiting for you." Silence. Pure silence. Because children tell truth without strategy. No manipulation. No performance. Just honesty. And somehow hearing it from his son shattered Ethan more than anything I said. He sat down heavily on the couch and covered his face with both hands. For the first time all afternoon, he looked broken. Not angry, broken. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he whispered. I believed him. Strangely enough, I did. I don't think Ethan woke up one morning planning to become this person. I think greed arrived slowly, compromise by compromise, excuse by excuse, until eventually he could no longer recognize himself. The same way I almost stopped recognizing him. I sat down across from him carefully. Then I said the hardest thing I've ever said in my life. "I forgive you." His head lifted instantly. Monica looked shocked. Even Grace seemed surprised. But I wasn't finished. "I forgive you," I repeated softly. "Because carrying hatred would destroy me too." Tears slid down Ethan's face now. Real tears. But then I continued. "But forgiveness and trust are not the same thing." The room became still again. "I will not hand you control over my life." His face collapsed completely after that, and somehow, that was the moment I finally stopped feeling afraid of him. 1 year later, the front doors of Ella's house opened on a bright spring morning. I stood near the entrance holding a pair of silver scissors, while sunlight poured across the newly renovated building behind me. For a moment, I simply stared at the sign above the doorway. Ellis House Recovery and Support Center. My maiden name. My beginning. Somehow, after everything that happened, reclaiming that name felt symbolic. Like finding myself again. Reporters from a small local newspaper stood nearby while volunteers arranged flowers along the sidewalk. Nurses moved through the halls preparing patient rooms. Fresh paint and coffee filled the air. And for the first time in years, the future no longer frightened me. Grace walked toward me carrying a clipboard, her hair tied back loosely, while exhaustion and happiness mixed across her face. "We're already full for next month," she said with disbelief. I laughed softly. Good, because that meant people needed this place. More than I ever imagined. Ellis House wasn't a luxury facility. That was never the goal. It was something far more important. A safe place for elderly people recovering from surgery, illness, or medical trauma who had nowhere else to go. Some patients stayed for 2 weeks, others for months. Some had families who loved them but couldn't provide care. Others had families who simply disappeared. People like me. Grace stopped beside me and adjusted the flowers near the entrance absent-mindedly. "You nervous a little. You've already done the hard part." I looked at her and smiled softly. No. The hard part was surviving heartbreak. She didn't answer immediately. Then she quietly took my hand. "Well, you survived." The ribbon-cutting ceremony itself felt surreal. Applause echoed around the building while cameras flashed softly. But the moment that truly mattered came later. After everyone left. After the speeches ended. After silence finally returned. An older woman named Dorothy arrived that evening carrying a single suitcase. Hip replacement surgery. No nearby family. Her daughter lived 3 states away and rarely called. I watched Grace help her settle into a room gently while explaining medication schedules and physical therapy routines. Dorothy looked embarrassed accepting help. I recognized that feeling immediately. Older people are often taught to apologize for needing care. Before leaving the room, Grace adjusted Dorothy's blanket carefully. The exact same way she once adjusted mine. And suddenly, tears filled my eyes. Because I finally understood something beautiful. Pain can become purpose if you let it. Later that night, I sat alone in my office inside Ellis House, reading patient intake forms when someone knocked softly on the open door. Noah. He had grown taller over the past year. Broader shoulders, deeper voice. But his smile still looked exactly like the little boy who once brought me flowers in the hospital. "Hey, Grandma." I smiled warmly. "You're late. Baseball practice." He stepped inside and glanced around the office. "You really built all this?" "No," I said softly. "We did, because Ellis House belonged to everyone who chose compassion over convenience." Noah sat across from me quietly, then he hesitated. "Dad asked about you." The room grew still. Ethan. Even after a year, hearing his name still hurt. Not sharply anymore, just sadly, like touching an old scar. "How is he?" I asked carefully. Noah shrugged slightly. "Better, I think." After our confrontation, Ethan's life collapsed quickly. Monica filed for separation 6 months later, after discovering the full extent of their debt. The house was sold. Several investments failed entirely. And for the first time in his adult life, Ethan had no one left to rescue him financially. Strangely enough, that may have saved him. Because sometimes people only change after losing everything, protecting them from consequences. Noah reached into his backpack quietly. "He asked me to give you this, a sealed envelope." My stomach tightened immediately. I recognized Ethan's handwriting instantly. I stared at it for a long moment before opening it carefully. Inside was a letter. Simple, handwritten. "Mom, I spent most of my life believing success meant never looking weak, never needing help, never failing. And somewhere along the way, I started treating love like a transaction instead of a gift. I blamed stress, debt, Monica, pressure. But the truth is simpler and uglier. I became selfish. I stopped seeing you as my mother and started seeing you as security. I will regret that for the rest of my life. When Dad died, you carried me through grief. And when you got older, I repaid you with fear and manipulation. I'm ashamed of that man. I don't expect forgiveness anymore. I just needed you to know I finally understand what I destroyed. I hope Ellis House helps people the way you once tried to help me. Love, Ethan." By the time I finished reading, tears blurred the page completely. Noah watched me carefully from across the desk. "You okay?" I smiled sadly. "Yes, and strangely enough. I meant it, because the anger inside me had faded months ago. Grief remained. Disappointment too. But hatred, no. I refused to let hatred become the final chapter of my life. I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside my desk drawer. Not hidden, not displayed, just kept, like a memory too painful to celebrate, but too important to throw away. That evening, after Noah left, I walked slowly through Ella's house, checking on patients before bed. Soft lights glowed through the hallways while nurses moved quietly between rooms. Inside one room, an elderly man slept peacefully while a volunteer read beside his bed. Inside another, Dorothy laughed softly at an old television show with one of the caregivers. Nobody looked abandoned there. Nobody looked invisible. Grace found me standing near the hallway window sometime later. "You're smiling," she observed gently. "I was just thinking about what I looked around the building quietly. All my life, I thought family was something you were born into." Grace leaned beside me, and now I smiled softly through tears. "Now I think family is the people who stay." Grace's eyes filled immediately. Then she wrapped her arm around mine gently as we looked down the peaceful hallway together. And for the first time in many years, I no longer felt lonely. Sometimes the deepest wounds in life don't come from strangers. They come from the people we would have sacrificed everything for. But this story isn't only about betrayal. It's about awakening. For most of my life, I believed love meant endless forgiveness, endless sacrifice, endless giving. I thought being a good mother meant always protecting my child, even at my own expense. But love without boundaries can slowly destroy a person, especially when kindness is mistaken for weakness. What saved me wasn't money, it wasn't revenge, and it wasn't winning. It was realizing that my worth did not disappear just because I grew older. There are people in this world who will value your heart, your presence, and your humanity, even when the people closest to you fail to. And sometimes the family who saves you is the family you never expected. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment below. What would you have done in my place? Could you forgive someone like Ethan? And if you've ever felt invisible, abandoned, or unappreciated by people you loved, please know this: your life still matters. Your kindness still matters. And it is never too late to begin again. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I truly read every comment.